So lately, my audience members have been telling me about this whole 60 FPS stuff, and they've been letting me know their minds. In fact, some of them, are calling me out in quote. So, Luke Morris, shout out to you. You said, based on my comment where I replied to you about how, just because one game is handling 4K and 100 FPS on a console doesn't mean all other games will do it. You even mentioned and said, if Spider-Man is doing it with ray tracing on, how is it possible that other games are not able to do it at even like 1080p? In fact, you even came out here to say it's as simple as what I'm seeing with my own eyes. The same hardware in PS5 running Spider-Man, which looks a lot better than Gotham Knights at 100 FPS with ray tracing, but not being able to hit 60 FPS in Gotham Knights. Same happened with Requiem. And as soon as it got patched, you all didn't say, sorry, but people like you always say the same thing when a game gets released at 30 FPS. But as soon as they get patched to your 60, you're nowhere to be seen. That is not true, Luke. You should have turned on your notifications because May 23rd, 2023, I actually made that video on A Plague Tale Requiem. Now, here's the thing. You see, this whole conversation about the console, whatever, and so on and so forth, is one that I've actually kind of entered with kind of a light touch. I never really wanted to take off the gloves, but I think we're probably there. And that's fine because I think what people don't necessarily realize is it doesn't even really matter, how somebody may feel about something. The whole game development thing is a scientific enterprise. It's something where hardware and software are interacting with one another and they have to follow rules. So before I jump in any further, let me go ahead and state my pedigree as a hobbyist game developer. 3 years ago, I picked up game development. While I was on my game development journey, a buddy of mine also jumped on the bandwagon with me. Good friend, we were making videos together doing Tom Clancy's The Division. Eventually, because of my health and the fact that we had a fourth child, I decided to step away from game development actively. Still learning, still doing projects, but just not necessarily trying to pursue game development on a commercial scale. My friend has gone ahead to continue. His name is Identity. He has his progress here on a YouTube channel following it. And if you actually want to know if I'm capable of doing what he's done, you can reach out to him and tweet him. I recommend that you go check out his demo on Steam and ask him if I'm actually full of it or if I actually know what I'm talking about. Because you see, this whole conversation, for the most part, I never really wanted to do this. I never wanted to come out here saying, oh yeah, I do this, I do that. No, I think we need to talk on these terms. Now, the whole thing about his project right now is that he's actually doing this project solo. The goal is that he wants to do this all by himself. He's nuts. He's crazy. In fact, I tweeted and I replied to him. I said, bro, all I see is sweat and pixels. Just keep going. No looking back. He said, I'm tired, bro. I know exactly how he feels. In fact, I feel so bad for him, but this is a challenge he's giving himself to make himself a huge project of this scale by himself, doing environment design, doing, character, camera, and controls design, doing AI design, enemy design, all by himself in Unreal Engine 4. All I'm doing is I'm rooting for him. If he needed any resources when he first started, he'd send me a text message, I'll send him a resource. Because this is a journey where you actually have to learn and put things into work and put things into practice. So here's the thing with this whole talk about game development. When I make claims and say, guys, just because one game is running 4K 30 or whatever it is, or 4K 60 on one platform or whatever, doesn't mean every game can do it. And some people say, why can't it just be done in 1080? It's because I kind of know what I'm talking about. You see, a lot of people say things like, if they actually turn off ray tracing and reduce the resolution in Gotham Knights, we're more than likely going to be able to get 60 FPS. But here's where they have a problem. Frame rates is not directly proportional to resolution. It's actually directly proportional to frame time, which is pretty much how fast your frame time metrics go per frame in your game. Look on the top right corner of this Gotham Knights screen, not the top left, the top right. You're going to see an FPS counter with stats. This is the one that comes inside of the game of Gotham Knights. It looks like the one in Unreal Engine because Gotham Knights is done in Unreal Engine 4, so they just basically left it as default. If you notice the numbers up top, you're going to see one that says 30 FPS because I paused the game, frame 33.33 milliseconds. These are the numbers that you're going to pay attention to. When I unpause the game, you're going to realize that that number called frame, I just clicked on it, is going to eventually reduce by over 50% if the game is running at 60 FPS. Did you see that? I'll pause the game again. I'll move my mouse away from the game. and the game is now using less resources, so it's put me at 33.3 milliseconds. When I go back to the game, and then now the game is running at 60 FPS, that frame time is now anywhere from 8-9 milliseconds, and its maximum to give you the 60 FPS performance is at 16 milliseconds. This is what frame rates is directly proportional to. If you think I'm also maybe throwing some random talk here, let's look at an Unreal Engine developer actually teach this particular thing to game developers in an Unreal Engine 4 conference. This is Ari. Ari is teaching here about game optimization at an Unreal Engine, conference, and he's basically kind of quizzing the developers. And the first question he asks them once he breaks out from all the introduction is, what is this? Do you remember this number that I just showed you, 33.3 milliseconds? This number is what's directly proportional to you getting 30 FPS or getting 60 FPS. It's not about changing your resolution in the game, even though when you change your resolution, you can get some more FPS, but you're not going to get that consistent FPS because you need your frame time to continue to stay consistent. So again, if the game is not developed from ground up, Luke, if the game is not developed from ground up with that frame time in mind, the developers have to go back and make modifications to their assets to be able to get the game to achieve that frame time. It's not about unlocking the frame rate, because you unlock the frame rate and then maybe there's something they put in the game that's really heavy, that's designed to run with the frame time of 33 milliseconds. And that one aspect of the game eventually causes you a whole problem. What if there's a stage? What if there's like a cutscene? What if there's an element that the developers have designed? What if there's a code base that they designed that's drawing a lot of resources and they're like, okay, we can reconcile that this resource is actually running at 33 milliseconds when it's 30 FPS. But if we want to make the 60 FPS version, we actually have to go back in here and we have to actually change this particular aspect to get that 16 milliseconds. They did the same thing in A Plague Tale. Some of you keep saying, oh, they patched A Plague Tale. They patched A Plague Tale. Ladies and gentlemen, they did not patch A Plague Tale. They made changes to A Plague Tale to be able to get you 60 FPS. If you watch the Digital Foundry review, what they did, or the technical performance test, what they did was they went ahead and they changed the rats so that the rats could stop taking a lot of resources, making the rats run at 30 FPS to give room for the CPU. This is because you could see that system as one of the most demanding factors in the game. So it wasn't a patch, it was an entire change. And they did it in like 6 months. The game came out in October. They dropped this patch by May. I think it was May or so that they dropped this patch. So 6 months in development to go change a few things to basically allow for you to be able to tweak the rats and do some really, really interesting stuff. Not only did they change the rats, they also went ahead and changed the detail for some of the NPCs when you're at a distance. They changed their amount of quality. Not only did they do that, they also went ahead and made some changes to foliage. And then they probably made some changes that you probably can't even see with your naked eye in order for them to achieve, what was that number? 33.33 milliseconds. So those of you who are saying Starfield ought to be able to run at 60 FPS because that game ran at 60 FPS, you got to go back and ask and say, they're developers of Starfield. What did you develop your game with in mind? Did you develop your game in mind with 16 milliseconds? They'll say the PC version we did, but the console version we didn't. We were probably making the game on the PS4 and Xbox One, or when we even put it on the Series X, we couldn't even get that 16 milliseconds. If you're even anything more than 16 milliseconds for the most part is going to basically give you jumpy frames. You got to achieve that 16 and it's got to be smooth to be able to give the full 60 FPS experience. If not, you're going to be getting some really interesting jumps. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how much I can explain this stuff, guys. I mean, I'm tired. I've been trying to tell you guys this stuff for months, but it appears that some of you are not listening. Now, here's the other side of this whole conversation. I understand, right? I understand. Here's the thing. One of my audience members also commented something and said something about the market and the economics of, the 60 FPS option. Where is your comment? Laughing Z. It was the Laughing Z. He commented and said, the market is asking for this, so I think developers need to put it. And I said, I agree. But what you're asking for is that these developers take the game back into the studios and basically make changes, which, God help them, they can find all the changes that they need to be able to get you that 60 FPS patch. Now, because he was addressing market factors and saying, this is a business decision that needs to be made, I also wanted to go ahead and ask you, Laughing Z, and say, bro, do you think that this is a sound decision from a marketing perspective? If you were in charge of a studio's budget, what would you rather spend time on? If you've already launched the game at 30 FPS and you went and said, you know what, we'd launch this game at 30 FPS because we started developing it with 33 milliseconds in mind. What if we start our next game where every single thing is 60 FPS? Because I can almost guarantee you, you can even put money on it, that Warner Brothers Montreal's next game is going to be 60 FPS. That was almost sure for sure. You can almost guarantee that all these companies that have their games locked at 30 FPS, their next game is going to run 60 FPS on these new consoles. Because they are going to go back now and say, okay, we're going to develop the game that gives this 60 FPS experience to the scale of which we can do it. We're not going to dare do anything like Starfield for these consoles. This is my understanding of frame rates and frame time and how it works. I still have a lot to learn, by the way. I don't know everything. In fact, once I jumped into optimization, that's where it broke me. Once I started learning, I was like, this is messed up. And I backed away. I literally backed away. And so, yeah, you may say, oh, well, but if we just drop I still keep seeing that argument. If we just drop the resolution and turn off ray tracing, it's not going to give you 50% more frame time. I could drop that. We're doing 110 FPS stable. I can drop it, right? It's still going to be giving me about similar FPS, about 111. When I'm running around the open world, I'm doing 100 FPS. Maybe I'm doing 80 sometimes, depending on where I am, depending on the asset density in the city. This is about the same performance that I'm getting at 4K. I'm not losing any FPS if I actually go to 4K. Because I've never really seen the correlation for most games. Now, in some games, it actually does work. For some strange reason, it actually does work. But that's because those games, I guess they're made differently. I guess Unreal Engine has an internal, set of processing that goes on that the engine just cannot necessarily do it like, say, the Snowdrop engine. And so this is why you cannot say, oh, Spider-Man is doing it. Lord knows what they used to make that. I don't know if they even use a game engine or they use Granola to make Spider-Man. So smooth, that game. They also use dynamic resolution as well, which is something that many developers are probably not touching yet, especially if you were making a game in the PS4 era and the game has some really interesting scope and you're like, man, I'm not going to do dynamic resolution. I'm just going to do straight 60. But if you do dynamic, you can get yourself that constant 60. You have to drop asset quality. You have to drop, all kinds of quality. And we're not even talking AI. We're not even talking elements in the streets. We're not talking about these things. This car that's parked right here is taking up memory. These 3 NPCs that are running over here that are behaving like this, they're running some code in the background and they're taking up resources. So all of these things, they start to actually come into play. And for those that keep saying Spider-Man, you do know that they made another Spider-Man game that runs at 60 FPS, right? It's not the 2018 one that runs at 60 FPS. It's the remastered one. Why do you think they went ahead and did that? They just wanted to just spend more time in the studio and just, kick rocks and high fives. They were constantly making changes in the game to be able to get that to be able to get that performance. So again, you have to be able to go ahead and point these things out, because if you don't point them out, you just, you're not making any sense in the conversation. The conversation is not looking at all of the different variations in things. I guess I gotta go hang out with my kids. Leave a comment in the comment section. Peace out.